One of the most used things in recent warfare is gunpowder. We want to see what gunpowder is, where it came from, and who invented it. To start the story of gunpowder, we have to go to ancient China, 86 BC to be exact. This is when the Han dynasty is in action, and Wu is the emperor of the dynasty. Wu tells his people, we need to be stronger, and we need some new inventions to help us. So he tells them to create something that can explode. After this news goes all around the dynasty, alchemists throughout the empire started to create something that might be able to explode. These alchemists tried their hardest and mixed different types of things, but they could never get that explosion they needed. Emperor Wu eventually dies, but his wishes was alive and well throughout the dynasty, so the people that took over always wanted something that might be able to explode. Century after century, these guys are trying, but they can't get anywhere. They would create things that would catch on fire and burn, but none of them could explode. This is when we get to 500 years after Emperor Wu, about 492 AD, and this is eventually when one alchemist is finally able to create something that might explode. When this matter would light up, it would give off a purple smoke, and for that reason, he called it the purple light. But the purple light was no good for warfare. It wasn't even good to put in a firecracker and explode. Either way, the Chinese never gave up. They continued working on something that might be able to explode. You can tell by the story of the gunpowder that the Chinese never give up. Century after century, generation after generation, they're still trying to figure something out that was told them hundreds of years ago. The time continues to pass until we get to 1000 AD, more than 1,000 years since Emperor Wu died. Some people criticize the automobile industry that we're making cars for about 100 years, but we still haven't figured out how to build a flying car. You could say they lose hope, because in terms of history, we recently created the automobile. Either way, the Chinese never gave up on their project. Eventually, in the year 1044 AD, they created a substance that could explode like today's firecrackers. With the help of this, they could put fear in the enemy's eyes. They were not satisfied with the product they made, and they continued to work on better things. But they said for now, we could put some fear in the enemy's eyes with this product, and eventually, we'll get to that explosion we actually desire. The different Chinese empires were in a place where the Mongols would always attack from the north, and that's one of the reasons the Chinese built the Great Wall of China. But the Mongols would jump through that wall with ease, and that is why the Chinese were looking for a weapon so they could defeat these guys. In the different Chinese dynasties, the alchemists that worked on products to make something that could explode, all the formulas they came up with were all classified, and you could say anything they wrote down was classified, so they either destroyed it or they actually didn't even write it down. And that is why to this day, we still don't know who made the original gunpowder, and because of that, we don't know who actually invented gunpowder in the first place. There are different Chinese history books that give a different name to who invented it, but different historians argue with one another, and they say it's this guy, but they could never come to a conclusion. Unfortunately, we really don't know who invented it in China. Alright, let's move forward. Who invented the modern gunpowder? We'll get to that in a minute, but the first time gunpowder was used in a war was in 1232, 5 years after Genghis Khan died. This is when the Jin dynasty controls China, and they're having a war with the Mongols. A thing that was used in that war was a type of bottle rocket. Yes, you heard me right. It was basically ancient bottle rockets that would be sent like rockets to make a really loud noise. This weapon would terrify the Mongols, but the explosion was not that strong, so it was really not damaging anyone. It would just injure them a little bit or bruise them so they can get back to fighting. And that is the reason the Chinese could not defeat the Mongols in that war, even though for the first time they had a gunpowder. The Mongols found something new in this war. and since they won, they had some in their arsenal now, so they hired different alchemists to figure out how they could make this gunpowder better and stronger. Eventually, the Mongols figured something out that was stronger, and you could say they were ready to go fighting again. With these weapons, they successfully went all the way to Europe. But the formula of this weapon got passed around like hotcakes. When the British figured out such weapon exists, they couldn't believe it. But it wasn't like they were gonna let this go this easily. So it was their turn to start experimenting with it and making it better and better. And on the other side of the water, the French are also working on their formula. Then we get to 1242, when Roger Bacon pretty much invents the modern gunpowder. And back then, he calls it the black powder. The black powder that's used to this day. The British government gets the formula from Roger Bacon, but the church had the ultimate power at that time. And unfortunately, because for making the black powder or the gunpowder, he gets accused of witchcraft. So they arrest him and throw him in prison. Roger Bacon went to prison just for inventing a new form of gunpowder. And on the other side of the water, a German by the name of Berthold Schwarz invented the cannon. But this is a different story, because a lot of people believe that the cannon was invented in the Middle East and it was used to fight the Mongols off. And that is the reason we can't 100% prove that the Germans invented it or it was invented in the Middle East. The first war that cannons were actually used was the France and British War in 1346. In this war, the British had cannon, and that is the reason they only came with 13,000 men, and they easily defeated the 40,000 Frenchmen. They say in that war, the French army did not know what was going on, and they didn't know who were they facing. Just like we said, it was the first time this was actually used in warfare. After this war, the French did not get back to war with the British until they had their own cannon, and then they were ready for war. It is interesting to know that the longest war in history was between the Persians and the Romans, which lasted for more than 770 years. And the second longest war in history was between the British and the French, which lasted over 706 years. When you look at history, the British and the French fought until the year 1815, and that's the year they defeated Napoleon. And after 1815, they have not fought again. From that year, they realized they shouldn't fight each other. They should hire countries to fight with each other. Throughout the 700-year war between the French and the English, the church was always against the usage of cannon. But you could say back then, the armies had more power and they could ignore the church. The technology of the cannon went from Europe all the way to the Ottoman Empire, and they started to take over Europe with these cannon. The only reason the Ottomans were able to take Constantine was because of cannons. If you've seen our video about the Battle of Chaldiran, you will know that the Persians did not have cannons, while the Ottomans had cannons, and that is why they were defeated. Either way, it is true that the Chinese weren't able to get that boom they really wanted. But since they started the idea of looking for gunpowder and making things explode, they still say the gunpowder is a Chinese invention. And it's good to know the reason the fireworks is really popular in Chinese culture is because of this as well.